Breaking tonight, Canada rejects new U.S. pay-to-play tariffs, declaring trade independence and expanding year-round Arctic operations.
Canada stands up to new U.S. access fee tariffs, builds alternative alliances, and asserts full Arctic sovereignty.
Breaking tonight, Canada just changed the conversation about America's trade dominance. Mark Carney didn't negotiate. He redefined the rules entirely. Tensions are rising between Ottawa and Washington tonight. Trump proposed that Canada accept American tariff structures without question, but instead of diplomatic deflection, Carney laughed, and an entire room of Canadian business leaders laughed with him. Everyone believed Canada would quietly comply with Washington's trade demands. Financial analysts expected Ottawa to cave under pressure within weeks. Political observers assumed Carney would soften his rhetoric to avoid confrontation. They were all utterly incorrect. Toronto, November the 6th, 2025. Standing at the Canadian Club podium, Mark Carney made a comparison that instantly went viral across 3 continents. When asked about Trump's new country club trade policy, charging nations access fees to the American market, Carney smiled and said something that made the entire room erupt in laughter. "I prefer Costco," he declared. "It's more open, more fair, and actually affordable." Translation? Canada just told Washington that American protectionism is nothing more than an overpriced membership scam. And what happened next? The Prime Minister who rejected diplomatic theater reveals exactly why Canadian confidence is surging, while American leverage crumbles. Dear viewers, between November 2024 and November 2025, something extraordinary happened in North American trade relationships. Washington pushed too hard, Ottawa said no, and Mark Carney, calm, strategic, Mark Carney became the leader every Canadian started believing in and every American analyst started taking seriously. This isn't just about one witty punchline at a business luncheon. This is about the fundamental collapse of America's ability to dictate terms to its closest ally and the rise of Canadian economic independence as the new reality shaping continental power. Let's go back to where this shift actually began, March 2025. Trump's trade team announced a sweeping policy framework they called Fair Access Tariffs. The concept was simple: pay to play. Any nation wanting preferential access to American consumers would need to accept tariff structures designed in Washington, enforced in Washington, and beneficial primarily to Washington. European leaders protested publicly, Asian governments negotiated quietly, Mexico scrambled to preserve NAFTA benefits. In Canada did something no one expected. They started building alternatives. By May, Carney had already held 17 meetings with European trade ministers. Ours 12 conversations with Pacific Rim economic officials, and 8 strategic sessions with China's commerce delegation. He wasn't asking for sympathy, he was offering partnerships. The pattern was identical in every conversation. Foreign officials would reference Trump's tariff threats, express concern about American reliability, and ask if Canada could offer stable alternatives. Carney's answer was always the same: yes, and we'll respect sovereignty while doing it, but here's what makes the Canadian Club moment so significant. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. For 8 months, Carney had been positioning Canada differently, building coalitions quietly, strengthening confidence deliberately. The Costco joke wasn't off the cuff. He was saying out loud what everyone in that room had been thinking privately. Canada's prosperity doesn't require American approval anymore. The laughter that followed meant something deeper than humor. It was recognition. Recognition that the old rules, where Washington sets terms and Ottawa complies, were officially over. And Trump's response? Silence. Not the strategic kind, the stunned kind. Because what can you say when your closest ally, your largest trading partner, your most reliable defense collaborator, just publicly compared your signature policy to an overpriced country club? You can bluster on social media, you can threaten retaliation, but you can't undo the perception shift that just happened. Carney continued his speech with surgical precision. He mentioned that 85% of Canadian exports already enter the United States tariff-free under USMCA. He noted that Canada, unlike most nations, isn't actually paying Trump's access fees. And then he delivered the line that defined his entire economic vision. We're focused on building here, building out, and controlling what we can control. Let that sink in. While Trump fixates on tariffs and trade wars, Carney is building factories. Washington's busy threatening allies. Ottawa's busy strengthening partnerships. America isolates itself economically. Canada's becoming the stable, predictable alternative everyone wants to work with. Then Carney shifted to energy. This is where Canadian-American tension gets real. Someone asked if regulations like Bill C-69 were killing investment. Carney's answer was pure Carney. They're wrong. 2 words, 1 message. Leadership grounded in facts rather than fear. He explained that Canada is already working with Alberta on what Premier Danielle Smith called the grand bargain, balancing oil production with carbon capture innovation. Then he said something that reframed the entire energy debate. The future of oil export is going to be low carbon. Not might be, not should be, is going to be. That wasn't a prediction. It was a declaration. Carney wasn't asking for America's approval on energy policy. He was informing them of Canada's direction, whether Washington likes it or not. And then came the moment that will define Carney's leadership style for years to come. Then someone asked about defense spending. Would Canada boost military budgets to hit NATO targets or satisfy Trump's demands? Carney's response stunned everyone in the room. We're not going to spend money on defense just because all the other kids are doing it. You could have heard a pin drop. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone was clapping. Because that line wasn't about military budgets. It was about sovereignty. It was about a Canadian leader finally saying what every Canadian has been thinking for decades. We're not America's junior partner. We're not Europe's follower. We're Canada. And we'll make decisions based on Canadian interests, not international peer pressure. Carney then revealed something that most Canadians didn't even know. Under his leadership as Prime Minister, Canadian forces now operate in the Arctic 365 days a year. Previously, deployments lasted just 4 months annually. That's not just a policy change. That's a strategic transformation. Think about the Arctic for a second. Russia's testing our boundaries up there. Climate change is opening shipping routes nobody expected. Trillions in resources sit under melting ice. And now, Canada's there year-round, not visiting, living there, asserting control every single day. That's what non-negotiable sovereignty looks like. But what makes Carney's approach so effective isn't aggression, it's confidence. When he speaks about Trump's policies, there's no anger, no defensiveness, no desperation. There's clarity, there's strategy, there's the calm assurance of someone who knows exactly where his country's headed, regardless of what happens in Washington. Compare that to Trump's approach. The threats, the tweets, the chaos. Trump governs through intimidation. Carney leads through inspiration. Trump demands loyalty. Carney earns respect. Trump isolates America. Carney connects Canada. And the results speak for themselves. Since Carney became Prime Minister in late 2024, Canada has secured 7 major trade agreements, 3 defense partnerships, and 12 economic collaboration frameworks, with nations specifically seeking alternatives to American unpredictability. Foreign direct investment into Canada increased 34% between January and October 2025. Manufacturing job creation in Ontario alone exceeded the previous 5 years combined. Canadian tech companies that were planning to relocate to Silicon Valley reversed course and expanded in Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal instead. Why? Because Carney created something that money can't buy and tariffs can't force. Confidence. Confidence that Canada has a plan. Confidence that leadership is stable. We're protecting our own sovereignty. The future looks bright, and that's not because America gave us permission, it's because Canada earned it. This speech wasn't about mocking Trump. It was about showing there's another way to lead. One that doesn't require enemies to function. One that doesn't need chaos to justify itself. One that builds rather than destroys. Toward the end, Carney went back to Canada's roots. He talked about the years after World War II. Veterans came home and built entire neighborhoods. Universities opened doors to thousands of new students. Canada built the St. Lawrence Seaway, the Trans-Canada Highway, Expo 67, the CN Tower, all from Canadian ambition and Canadian work. We used to build in this country, Carney said. His voice stayed steady, but you could hear the passion underneath. We'll build big, fast, and bold again. That line received a standing ovation because it wasn't nostalgia. It was a promise. A promise that Canada's best days aren't behind it. They're directly ahead, waiting for the courage and leadership to make them real. And then came the mic drop moment everyone will remember. When asked how many more seats he'd need for a parliamentary majority, Carney smiled that calm, confident smile and said, "Call your local MP if they're not a Liberal." The room exploded. Laughter, applause, recognition that this wasn't just a politician wrapping up a speech. This was a leader who knows his momentum is real, his support is growing, and his opposition is fracturing. Here's what that line actually meant. Conservative MPs have been crossing the floor. Carney doesn't waste time attacking Poilievre. The numbers tell the story. While the conservative leader burns energy on division and anger, Carney's building the coalition that'll shape Canada for decades. What comes next? Trump's probably going to make threats. Tariffs, perhaps. Trade restrictions. Maybe even diplomatic pressure. But here's the reality he's facing. Canada isn't afraid anymore. When you have alternatives, threats lose power. When you have confidence, intimidation fails. When you have leadership like Carney's, steady, strategic, and unshakable, chaos can't destabilize you. The Canadian Club speech will be studied for years, not because of the Costco joke, though that was brilliant, not because of the laughter, though that was historic, but because it marked the moment when Canada stopped asking for America's approval and started charting its own course. Carney never raised his voice. Didn't need to. His words hit harder than any threat could. That's his way. Calm, measured, showing Canadians and the world what actual leadership looks like. Strategic, confident, completely unafraid. He rejected Trump's trade arrogance, built up Arctic sovereignty, reignited Canadian ambition. This speech marked a turning point. And if you take one thing from November 6th, 2025, make it this. Mark Carney isn't just leading Canada. He's changing what Canadian leadership means. And Trump, despite all the bluster and threats, just learned something important. Some leaders won't be intimidated. Some nations won't be bullied. Some moments can't be taken back. When Carney mocked Trump's policies, the room erupted in laughter. But that laughter wasn't disrespect. It was liberation. Liberation from decades of assuming Canada needed America's blessing to succeed. Liberation from the belief that sovereignty meant isolation. Liberation from the fear that independence came with consequences too severe to accept. Carney proved otherwise. Canada, for the first time in decades, believes it too. You're watching Canada Next, breaking down the moments that shape nations and the leaders who define them. Subscribe now. What happens next between Canada and America will determine the future of this continent, and you need to understand how we got here.